Hi everyone, it's Katrina. They say the coldest places hold the hottest secrets. Let's jump into some of the most incredible and mysterious things found in Siberia. The explosion that rocked Siberia. On June 30th, 1908, an explosion rocked Siberia. This was many years before anybody had heard the term nuclear, when most people didn't even know what an atom even was. They definitely didn't know about splitting the atom. When eyewitnesses looked to the sky and saw a fireball and a shockwave as an explosion rattled their ears, they didn't know what was happening. What happened was devastation. Forests burst into flames. Trees were sent flying through the air for miles. But because this happened in Siberia, in a place where hardly anybody lived, the outside world didn't know about the explosion. It didn't even gain much attention in Russia. It wasn't until 1927 that scientists went in search of the truth. They knew something had happened, but they didn't know what. Geologist Leonid A. Kulik traveled to Siberia and found evidence of immense destruction. It looked like a giant bomb had gone off. The area of destruction covered 830 square miles. Kulik estimated 80 million trees were knocked down. At the very epicenter, there were still some trees standing, but they had been stripped of their bark as if exposed to an immense blast of heat. So, what happened? Was it a nuclear bomb dropped from an alien ship? Scientists do say it was alien, but not a bomb. It's believed an asteroid exploded in the atmosphere over the remote forest. But what if it was a bomb? Have you ever seen a meteor crater in Arizona? If you haven't, I highly suggest checking it out. The meteor crater is 50,000 years old and looks like it was made by an explosion. The hole in the ground is huge, about 3,900 feet in diameter and almost 200 feet deep. Scientists say the crater was made by the impact of a cosmic rock, and others are not so sure. In Mexico, the Chicxulub crater is believed to be the impact site of the asteroid that caused the dinosaurs to go extinct 65 million years ago. But if the enormous crater was made by a space rock, why does it have its own gravity anomaly? Then there is the Jordan Valley, located northeast of the Dead Sea in the Middle East. It's here where scientists have been puzzled over the destruction of Tal el-Hammam 3,600 years ago. Scientists presented the evidence that the Bronze Age city was destroyed by an airburst, the exact same type of airburst that they say occurred in Siberia in 1908. Only stronger! Experts claim the asteroid that exploded over Tal el-Hammam was even more powerful, detonating with roughly 1,000 times more energy than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The evidence is there to suggest something huge happened. Archaeologists have identified a layer of thick carbon and ash covering the whole city. They have also identified melted pottery, melted platinum, skeletal fragments of people who were disintegrated, and evidence of temperatures exceeding a balmy 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. So what's the problem? The issue is that there is no crater. Where is the giant hole in the ground, like in Mexico, Arizona, and Siberia? If all of these places were hit by an asteroid, wouldn't they all have craters? There are those who suspect some of these episodes of destruction were caused by prehistoric nuclear weapons. But which ones were the fault of asteroids and which ones were atomic bombs? What are these balls? Giant balls have appeared in Russia. Thousands of snowballs appeared on a beach in northwest Siberia, and the locals were at a loss for words. Take a look at these things. The picture taken by Sergei Bychenkov. They might look like rocks, but nope, they are real snowballs. It's like an ammunition depot for the most epic snow battle of history. Some of the snowballs were fairly small, no larger than a tennis ball, but some were gargantuan, almost 3 feet across. Those ones were more like snow cannonballs. If you're going to live in the Arctic Circle where these snowballs appeared, you have to be prepared to see some weird stuff. But even locals in the village of Naida on the Yamal Peninsula never expected giant snowballs. They couldn't make sense of how they got there, but scientists soon figured it out. Sergei Lysenkov from the Arctic and Antarctic Research Institute said the snowballs were a natural phenomenon, something he called sludge ice or slob ice. The snowballs can form only under very specific circumstances. There has to be a lot of wind and some chilly temperatures. Small pieces of ice form, get rolled by the wind and the water, and voila! You have ammunition for the snowball fight of your life. The ancient wolf. Scientists found a prehistoric wolf buried in the Siberian permafrost. This was in the middle of nowhere near the Terek River. If you can point to this place on a map, I'll be very impressed. The ancient predator is 44,000 years old. Scientists transported its preserved body to the Academy of Sciences, where it was then subjected to a full-scale autopsy under sterile conditions. That's really important. What scientists were most interested in is what was hiding inside the wolf's intestines. They wanted to learn about its diet and its health, but that wasn't all. They also wanted to analyze its gut bacteria. You're not going to believe what scientists found. They dissected the animal and discovered microorganisms that may have survived all of these years. For almost 50,000 years, they have been in hibernation inside the wolf's intestines. Professor Artemy Goncharov from the Northwest State Medical University said living bacteria can survive in fossilized animals. That's crazy. Scientists are hoping the wolf's microorganisms could have applications in modern medicine. And now for number 9, but first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a huge thank you to Sean Murphy for the super thanks. It really means a lot. If you are new here, subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. The Cannibal Idones of ancient Siberia. Now it's time to learn about the scariest ancient culture from Siberia. I say scary because some of the things they did were awful by our standards especially. The Idones were barbaric, terrifying, and even worse than Hannibal Lecter. But they were also more progressive than some societies today. The first thing to know is that scientists themselves know little about the Idones. Nobody knows precisely where they lived or where they came from. The only information modern scholars have about the Idones comes from ancient sources. The Greeks wrote about them, and so did the Chinese. The Idones appear to have been fascinating to every nearby culture that heard about them. Most historical documents place them as residing somewhere near the slopes of the Altai Mountains. The Idones were known to the Greeks as early as the 7th century BC, but not as their own civilization. Herodotus, the legendary historian, described them as being Scythian, but also distinctly unique. Ancient Byzantine scholar John Tzitzis claimed the Idones had long, flowing hair. John also wrote that they lived near the one-eyed men farther to the north. The Greeks, and even apparently the Byzantines, believed Siberia was populated by savage tribes and rampaging cyclops. It was Herodotus who made the most disparaging accusations against the tribe of the Idones. He claimed they practiced cannibalism, but not any kind of cannibalism you're familiar with. They only ate elderly males in their community. I think it's safe to say they didn't have any elderly care facilities. Herodotus said that when a man in the tribe grew too old, they were killed and eaten at a ceremonial feast. These sacrificed elderly gentlemen had to be consumed by his own family. The kids had to sit down and eat their own grandpa. When the gruesome part was over, the elder man's skull was gilded and put on the mantle, just like how you might put a funeral vase on the mantle. You would expect that a culture that practiced ritual cannibalism would be less than progressive, but that's not the case here. They may have eaten their grandfathers, but they seriously respected their women. Herodotus wrote that the Idones were all about equal rights. The women in their communities were just as important as the men, if not more important. They may have practiced something called polyandry, which is like polygamy but on the other foot. Polyandry is what you call it when a woman can take 2 or more husbands. If this is true, it means the Idones women could have had many husbands, but you know what that means. Each time one of her husbands got too old, she had to eat him. One woman may have 10 husbands and had to eat them one by one as they grew old. Do you think the Idones were savage monsters or forward thinkers? Mysterious fortress. There is a ruined fortress on an island in the middle of a lake in Siberia that is straight out of a myth. It is 1,300 years old, and scientists are desperate to understand its history. They don't know if it was a summer palace for a mighty ruler, and they don't know if it was a monastery, a funerary complex, a religious hub, or an observatory for gazing at the stars. The ancient ruin was found more than a century ago, and experts are no closer to learning its secrets today. You can see its high walls still standing almost 40 feet tall, undoubtedly built to keep enemies out. Researchers call it Porbajin, though nobody knows its real name. It's only 20 miles from the border of Mongolia in the center of Terek Lake. Nothing about the fortress makes sense. When researchers started investigating the ruin in 2007, they thought maybe it belonged to the ancient empire of the Uyghur nomads. But that wasn't the case, as Porbajin was built outside of their borders. Strangest of all is that the fortress shows no signs of permanent habitation. Whoever built it didn't even live in it. They constructed a fortress around 757 and then left. Archaeologists have found a main gate, courtyards, and more than 30 buildings, some still covered with traces of paint. Who builds an epic island city like this and then gives it up? If you have any thoughts, be sure to let me know in the comments. The Ice Princess. 2,500 years ago in Siberia, a beautiful maiden self-medicated by smoking marijuana. New research from Russian scientists has revealed the tattooed Ice Princess, had she been alive today, probably would have been an edgy influencer. The Siberian Ice Princess was discovered in eastern Russia in 1993. Scientists have been studying her continuously for the last 30 years. In that time, they have learned a lot. Scientists now know she was in her 20s when she died in the 5th century BC. Her skin was so amazingly preserved from being trapped in the ice for so long that scientists were able to see the tattoos right on her skin. She has been connected to the Pazyryk culture, a group that lived across the Siberian steppe for 400 years. This woman, whoever she may have been, was so important that she was buried inside a massive tomb. Inside her tomb was a large wooden coffin that contained her body. There was also horse meat in case she got hungry, and some mutton. Archaeologists found yogurt residue, a mysterious beverage in a horn cup, and several horses. The maiden was so important to her culture that she was buried with her own herd. What kinds of tattoos do you think an ice maiden got 2,500 years ago? The tattoo on her shoulders was of a huge mystical deer. On her wrist and thumb were other tattoos, but scientists aren't sure if they represent anything specific. The one thing scientists were never able to figure out was how the ice maiden died. It was the biggest mystery, and now it may have finally been solved. Russian scientists used MRI scans to determine the ancient maiden suffered from breast cancer. Andrei Letyagin of the research team said they identified a primary tumor. They also found metastases in the right axillary lymph nodes. There is no doubt about the diagnosis. This woman suffered from cancer. The scans also showed she had a bone infection, suggesting she may have fallen off a horse. Her cause of death was somewhere between her injuries from falling and her cancer. But there was a surprising substance found in her tomb. When archaeologists initially took the artifacts out of her burial chamber, there was one very peculiar container. Nobody knew what was in the container until modern science allowed them to test it. It turns out the container was full of marijuana. The Ice Princess most likely smoked to help ease the pain of her illness. The gateway to hell. There are so many giant holes scattered across Siberia, I don't know which one to tell you about first. Maybe I should start with the gateway to hell. How does that sound? The gateway to hell is a sinkhole that expands by 35 million cubic feet every year. This thing is terrifying. The gateway to hell is so big that scientists have given it a name. They call it the Batagaika crater. Researchers from Germany and Russia have been watching the sinkhole grow as if it was their baby. In the 1960s, the sinkhole was nothing but a little gully. It was a tiny pit that collected rainwater to form a pool. Now it's an ocean, expanded to almost half a mile in length and half a mile wide. But just what is a sinkhole anyway, and why are they all over Russia? According to the United States Geological Survey, sinkholes occur when rock underneath the surface dissolves. This is usually limestone rock, which collapses as it gets soaked over many years. What's happening in Siberia is the result of the whole place getting drenched by the melting permafrost. As the permafrost that's been around since the Ice Age melts, water seeps into the limestone rock underneath Siberia, and great big sinkholes start swallowing up the land. The Batagaika crater isn't near civilization, so it isn't a huge threat to any cities, but it is still a threat. This sinkhole alone releases roughly 5,000 tons of carbon into the atmosphere every single year. Since the 1970s, it's unleashed 169,000 tons of organic carbon, which helps warm the planet. Carbon isn't the only thing released. The sinkhole could also let loose dangerous microbes that have been locked in the permafrost for tens of thousands of years. This would be like spraying mass amounts of potentially deadly diseases into the atmosphere, which can then be dispersed over the planet like an invisible plague. Sometimes craters even explode. In 2017, a reindeer herder in northwest Siberia was minding their own business when they heard a loud blast and saw smoke rising from the ground. It looked like a bomb had gone off, but when they went to inspect where the smoke was coming from, they found a hole 60 feet deep. All around the hole were bits of ice and soil, all of which had clearly been blown out of it. Scientists have yet to 100% confirm what happened, but they do have a logical explanation. It's believed that as the frozen soil thaws, fossil pockets of gas are now exploding. Yikes! Over 17 of these similar holes have been found by locals in remote Siberia. The whole place has turned into a minefield, only these might be worse than mines. Nobody knows when or where a giant hole will blast itself into existence. The Valley of Death. In the far east of Russia, in a place that looks like it should be a winter wonderland, there is something far more terrifying than exploding holes. There is a place known as the Valley of Death, where animals enter but never leave. The Valley of Death in the Kamchatka Peninsula is home to birds, bears, foxes, eagles, lynxes, and a variety of other critters. None of them are immune to the danger of the valley. Sometimes a rabbit will hop into the valley and instantly die. Then a wolverine spots it from a distance and thinks it's found an easy dinner, only to die when it enters the valley. Then comes the eagle swooping down to get some dessert, and the eagle dies too. What is it that is killing all of these animals? Let's take a closer look to find out. It's about 1.2 miles long, a natural trough like a gutter through the frozen wilderness. It was only found in 1975 by Soviet scientists. Vladimir Leonov from Russia's Institute of Volcanology and Seismology visited the Mystery Valley and immediately identified the cause of death. It's a volcanic phenomenon, with toxic gas leaking from the valley to instantly poison and kill the animals that inhale it. The forensic science is irrefutable, but there are still a few unsolved mysteries. In the 1970s, Viktor Deryagin, a student of volcanology who visited the site, said Soviet military officials were interested in the natural phenomenon. Soviet authorities arrived by helicopter, collected samples, and then left. Nobody ever figured out what they wanted the samples for, or what they did with them. There is another rumor too. This one is the spookiest. It's been said that the animals that die in the valley disappear. They don't decompose, but are taken by someone or something. Nobody's ever caught whoever or whatever is stealing all of these animal bodies. How do you think this rumor got started? Who or what do you think is snatching carcasses? Let me know in the comments below. These human remains do not fit history. Almost a decade ago, Russian scientists from the Novosibirsk State University discovered human remains in a Siberian cave. It was reported by the Siberian Times that archaeologist Andrei Krivoshapkin found skull fragments and a rib in a layer of soil 50,000 years old. The amazing discovery was made within the mountains of the remote Altai region. But before you get too excited, I should explain that 50,000 years isn't that old for the remains of Homo sapiens. Let me lay some crazy facts on you. Among the oldest known remains of our species are the bones found at Omo Kibish 1 in Ethiopia. They date to roughly 233,000 years ago. At the Florisbad site in South Africa, there are bones of Homo sapiens that date to 259,000 years ago. Last but not least, at Morocco's Jebel Irhoud site, archaeologists have found human remains from 315,000 years ago. What made the skull fragments in Russia so shocking was that they didn't belong to Homo sapiens. These fragments were not 100% human. 80 miles away from where the fragments were discovered is the Denisova Cave, one of the most important caves in the world when it comes to prehistoric human history. Denisova Cave is where researchers found evidence of an extinct species called the Denisovans. Human beings, Neanderthals, and Denisovans are all linked through our genetic heritage. Scientists were shocked when they realized there were more than just Neanderthals and Homo sapiens sharing the world at one time. There were once at least 3, maybe even more, human species living in pockets across the globe. Scientists didn't know who the skull fragments in the Altai cave belonged to in 2015 when the discovery was announced, but they do now. Analysis has revealed that they are from Neanderthals. An investigation published in 2022, after almost 10 long years of research, gave everyone the very first look at a close-knit family of Neanderthals. 50,000 years ago, a group of adults and children were sheltering in their hunting camp. Then they all died at the exact same time for reasons unknown. The study revealed 13 genomes, which is important for one big reason. Up until this study, scientists guessed how many Neanderthals lived in a single community based on the size of their camps and their fossilized footprints. The genomic analysis revealed how many Neanderthals were living in the camp when they were killed. Now scientists can confidently say Neanderthal groups consisted of around 20 or so individuals. The bones were also shocking because they proved that Neanderthals and Denisovans were living in the same place at the same time. Their cave homes were only miles apart, so you have to assume they knew of each other's existence. Scientists have suggested that Neanderthals may have been driven to extinction because they were hermits. Their isolation from other human species and small families may have been their downfall. The Hanging Stone. The Hanging Stone in Siberia looks a lot more frightening than it really is. Standing underneath this thing gives you the impression that you're about to be crushed by a massive granite rock. The stone seems to defy the laws of gravity. It's 49 feet long and weighs 500 tons. That's even a bit too heavy for Hercules. The rock also looks as if it's hanging on by a thread 3,300 feet above the surface of a lake. It's located at the very edge of a cliff, looking like it should tip over and roll down the mountain at any second. The scariest part about the rock isn't that it looks like it's going to crush the next tourist who stands underneath it. The scariest part is the legend attached to it. According to the Sayan Aborigines from this part of Siberia, the stone will roll down the mountain when the world ends. They believe to this day that the end of existence will start as soon as the stone falls. They also believe the rocky ridge is secretly a slumbering hero they call the Sleeping Sayan. It's safe to presume he's a giant. They also claim the Hanging Stone is the ancient warrior's heart, and that when you touch it, you can feel it vibrating with his heart's slow and steady beating. People have been trying to dislodge the rock for years with no success. I don't just mean that tourists have been pushing the rock and kicking it for laughs. They've really been trying to push it off the cliff. Although scientists say it's a natural phenomenon, it's a really stubborn phenomenon. People have brought winches and jacks and tried to move the stone using modern equipment. Still, it hasn't budged. Even with the earthquakes that frequently shake the foundations of the rocky ridge, the stone hasn't moved in the slightest. Maybe it really is waiting for the end of the world. Russian submarines in the ice. In 2021, 3 Russian Navy submarines were spotted peeking through several feet of ice in the Arctic. By the way, these submarines were nuclear. The maneuver they pulled off is extremely tricky, with each sub surfacing within a few hundred feet of the other. It was one of the only times the maneuver has been successfully achieved. Russia's Ministry of Defense released a video of the submarine's conning towers sticking out from the floating ice of the Barents Sea. They were taking part in an expedition to the inhospitable region along with 600 military and civilian personnel. It's no easy thing to break through 5 solid feet of ice, even when you're in a submarine. Take a look at this picture of the submarines when they surfaced. The picture is from the Russian Ministry of Defense. It's crazy to think that these little towers of black metal have the destructive capabilities of destroying an entire city. Did you know nuclear submarines are effectively invisible while underneath the ice? They are basically ghosts armed with atomic weapons. When they do have to surface, submarine commanders usually look for patches of open water. When open water isn't available, they have no choice but to break through the ice. The way that happens is more complex than you may have been expecting. First, the commander must raise the submarine until its upper tower touches the bottom of the floating ice. Then the submarine uses compressed air to push seawater out of the submarine's tanks. The submarine turns itself into a jetpack, shooting seawater out of its tanks to create an intense upward force, shoving itself hard into the ice. This goes on until the ice cracks, and then it's just a matter of getting to the surface. You might also like to know that each Russian submarine is able to carry about 16 ballistic missiles, and each ballistic missile carries around 6 nuclear warheads. These things are capable of ushering in Armageddon. The life of an ancient charioteer. In southern Siberia, Russian archaeologists have found the unexpected. Not just the unexpected, but the unprecedented. Excavations at a railway project revealed the skeleton of a chariot driver. In ancient times, the driver of a chariot was known as a charioteer. This particular charioteer lived and died about 3,000 years ago. The dating is significant because historians didn't think that chariots had been invented in Asia at that time. The skeleton was discovered in a peculiar position. Researchers with Russia's Institute of Archaeology and Ethnology were the ones who opened the grave. They found the skeleton with a long metal rod laid across his body. The rod has a curved hook on each end, looking like a weird fantasy weapon. The device was anything but a weapon. It was a special tool used by a charioteer to secure the reins of his horses to his belt. It was like a convenience item, sort of like putting your car on autopilot. The tool held the reins while the charioteer rested their hands and took in the sights. Similar artifacts have been found in other parts of Russia, in China, and in Mongolia, but there's never been one this old discovered in the region. Researchers think the charioteer belonged to the long-lost Lugov culture. The Lugov were a group of Bronze Age cattle breeders. Archaeologists had always assumed they were sort of basic. They bred animals and lived a nomadic existence. Nobody had imagined they were building the world's first cars, making chariots to be used in everything from transport to warfare. As a side note, you might be interested to know that this area of Siberia has been home to many cultures over the centuries. The Karasuk culture lasted until the 11th century BC. Then the Lugov culture thrived until the 9th century BC. After the Lugov came the Tagar. The list goes on and on. Siberian volcanoes destroyed the world. Scientists have found evidence of catastrophic devastation, the likes of which you can't even imagine. 252 million years ago, the Permian extinction wiped out almost every living thing in the world. It turns out the extinction started thanks to Siberian volcanoes. During the Permian extinction, 96% of marine animals died. Researchers call it the Great Dying for a good reason. Global warming became so bad that animals in the ocean couldn't breathe anymore. Not a good situation for the fish. It wasn't a good situation for anyone on the planet. 57% of biological families went extinct, along with 83% of genera and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. This was the biggest mass extinction event of insects in the planet's history. And you know insects are pretty hard to kill. When the extinction wrapped up, the tiny percentage of life forms left had to diversify to stay alive. Millions of years of evolution followed, leading to the rise of the dinosaurs. And after the dinosaurs, the mammals. For a long time, scientists never knew how something so terrible happened so rapidly. But now, they've been able to blame it on Siberia. A group of scientists found a spike in nickel levels everywhere from the Arctic to India. They used a tool you may have never heard of before, something called an inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer. What this did was allow them to measure rare elements at their atomic level. In simplistic terms, scientists were able to track tiny bits of nickel found around the globe back to their origin in Siberia. When the huge Siberian volcanoes exploded, their debris traveled far and wide. These explosions were so devastating that if they happened today, human civilization would almost certainly be annihilated. Geologist Michael Rampino from New York University laid down the steps to extinction one by one. It started with the volcanic activity in Siberia, but it wasn't just volcanoes blowing their tops. What happened was that magma came into contact with coal deposits, releasing massive amounts of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide and methane are greenhouse gases, two gases that intensify global warming. The whole world heated up so much that the oceans practically stopped moving. Since the water was so sluggish, the oxygen in the world's oceans was slowly depleted. With no oxygen, there was no life. Nearly every single thing in the ocean died. Without the ocean, life simply can't exist on land. And this was what led to 90% of all living animals going the way of the dodo. So who's ready for a trip to Siberia? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching! Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and stick around for more videos you might have missed.
Ice tunnels. Underneath one of the most remote outposts in the world, there is a network of tunnels cut into the ice. Amundsen Scott Station is a research hub that can house hundreds of researchers at a time with state-of-the-art technology. What people don't know is that underneath the station there is a network of tunnels carved out of the ice. They hold pipes for sewage, water, power, and heat. But station personnel have started going to the tunnels and carving out memorials and shrines in honor of their experiences there. There is a pig's head with glasses, plaques, gloves, notebooks, and all kinds of things people leave behind to honor their first winter or their time in this frigid place. One of the strangest things to be found in the tunnels is the body of an atrophied white sturgeon and a written account of its adventures. Russians gifted the fish to American scientists, who discarded it after it was in a freezer for several months. Then it was rescued from a trash dump and passed on around to stations in Antarctica, where it now has its own shrine in the tunnels. Other parts of the tunnels are completely blocked off, and no one has any idea what is behind certain doors. And those who do aren't saying anything. Subglacial volcano. In 2013, scientists published an alarming study describing the first ever discovery of a subglacial Antarctic volcano. Found in the Marie Byrd Land Highland region, nobody knows when it will erupt, but when it does happen, it will create millions of gallons of water beneath the ice, many lakes full, according to a statement from study leader Doug Vines. He further explained that the eruption will send water gushing toward the sea and into a major ice stream, which drains Antarctic ice into the Ross Ice Shelf. The team discovered the volcano by accident when their equipment detected two series of small earthquakes in 2010 and 2011, between 15 and 25 miles below ground, near the boundary between the Earth's crust and the mantle. Based on their unusual depth, researchers concluded that the tremors were deep long-period earthquakes, or DPLs, which have unknown causes but are known to happen in volcanic areas. They subsequently determined that a volcano lies beneath over half a mile of ice. Evidence shows that it sits atop land that the team believes is made up of previous erupted material, indicating that it has erupted before. A strong eruption would be required to breach the surface of the ice, but the underlying heated water would cause ice to travel to the sea faster. Thankfully, sea levels would not rise by much, and the volcanic activity would not cause the entire ice sheet to melt. And now for an abandoned base. But first, I want to say a big thank you to Michael Anderson and his daughter. Thank you so much for supporting Origins Explained. And if you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Origins Explained family. Leningradskaya Station. For 20 years, from 1971 to 1991, Leningradskaya Station served as the Soviet Union's Antarctic base, where scientists studied meteorology, glaciology, oceanology, magnetism, and more. Built on a tall cliff by the 15th Soviet Antarctic Expedition on the Ots coast of the Victoria Land region, it regularly combated extreme winds, storms, and cold, which made life at the base far from comfortable and perhaps even dangerous. Consequently, icebreakers often got stuck for months during resupply missions, and it was incredibly expensive to operate the remote facility. The base was abandoned after the Soviet Union fell in 1991 due to financial difficulties, leaving the collection of buildings there vacant in the decades since. They were deserted as is, with the equipment and supplies, but researchers never returned there to continue their work. Russian authorities have entertained the idea of reopening the base and even sent icebreakers there at some point, but Leningradskaya Station remains abandoned, although other facilities have been established nearby. Long-lost wallet. While stationed in Antarctica in 1967 and 68, Navy meteorologist Paul Grisham lost his wallet. He cut his losses, moved on, and eventually forgot about it, until 53 years later, when someone returned the 91-year-old's long-lost property. He received his missing wallet earlier this year after someone discovered it while demolishing buildings at McMurdo Station, including the one Grisham stayed in during his time in Antarctica. Inside the wallet was a driver's license, a beer ration card, money order receipts from poker winnings he sent to his wife back in San Diego, a handwritten Kahlua liqueur recipe, and instructions for how to respond in the event of a nuclear, chemical, or biological attack. While stationed at McMurdo, Grisham worked grueling 12-hour on, 12-hour off days throughout the summer to prepare for the long, dark winter ahead. McMurdo Station was in what we called the banana belt. The temperature got up to about 25 degrees, and I've seen it as cold as minus 65, he told Channel 3000, adding it's almost inconceivable just how cold it is. It's almost impossible to describe to people who haven't been there. In fact, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how do we explain this to the folks at home, and we just never really came up with a good way to explain it. During what little downtime they had, Grisham and his colleagues passed the time by using the station's 2-lane bowling alley, working out at the gym, and playing poker and chess. Would you be able to live in Antarctica? Would you give it a shot for 6 months? Let me know in the comments below. Future plants. In recent years, scientists discovered evidence that West Antarctica was a lush temperate rainforest around 90 million years ago, during the age of the dinosaurs, standing in stark contrast to its current barren and frozen state. Practically nothing can live there now. Since it didn't have very much ice coverage, the continent's annual mean temperature was around 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Wildlife thrived, despite the 4 months of darkness that plagues Antarctica every year. At the time, the world was undergoing its warmest climate over the past 140 million years. As the Earth currently experiences rapid climate change, experts are looking into the possibilities that plants and insects could once again survive in certain parts of Antarctica. Professor Ian Hawes, an expert on Antarctica aquatic ecosystem, said that the warmest parts of Antarctica are beginning to merge towards the coldest parts of the sub-Antarctic, where we have much greater diversity of mosses, lichens, and flowering plants. He explained that organisms have a better chance of surviving the journey to the continent and after arriving as global temperatures rise. He says we should expect plants and small invertebrates from sub-Antarctic climates to start appearing in Antarctica. Eventually, rodents may make their way over there, although this will not likely happen for a long time. Some fish and crabs are already migrating southward toward Antarctica. While the climate is slowly becoming more hospitable to outsiders, it threatens to snuff out rare and fragile organisms found nowhere else on Earth. Scientists are still discovering new habitats throughout Antarctica, and may worry that any life forms within these environments will be wiped out before we ever even know about them. Martian Mineral. Science magazine recently reported the discovery of a rare Martian mineral rarely seen on Earth, beneath the Antarctic ice. Known as jarosite, it is a yellow-brown mineral that requires water and acidic conditions to form, according to NASA. It is actually found in abundance on Mars. Scientists have long wondered how jarosite became so plentiful on Mars, with some speculating that the planet was once covered in ice, facilitating the process necessary for it to form. Modern-day Mars no longer has the right conditions for it. The recently discovered presence of the mineral in Antarctica could help support this theory, according to a team of researchers who published a study earlier this year in the journal Nature Communications. Jarosite typically occurs on Earth when mining waste is exposed to rain and air, and it also forms near volcano vents. The team, led by geologist Giovanni Baccolo, never expected to find it in Antarctica, but they did in trace amounts in the deepest layers of a mile-long ice core they extracted. Using an electron microscope, the researchers examined the particles and determined that the jarosite formed within ice pockets, indicating that the jarosite on Mars may have occurred the same way. Baccolo remarked that this is just the first step in linking deep Antarctic ice with the Martian environment. Mars and Antarctica have more in common than you may have thought. Mummified penguins. In 2016, ornithologist Stephen Emsley discovered dozens of penguin corpses, some long dead and mummified, others who appeared to be recently deceased, at Cape Irizar on the Scott coast of the Ross Sea. Rumors of guano or bird poop stains in the area got the scientists' attention because there were no active penguin colonies ever being recorded there in recent history. When he arrived, he quickly noticed the guano, and shortly thereafter, he found the birds. He said, "In all the years I've been doing this research in Antarctica, I've never seen a sight quite like this." The mummified birds were mostly chicks, and they belonged to Adelaide penguins, a coastline-dwelling species that builds nests using pebbles. Some of the dead penguins dated back between 800 and 5,000 years, revealing that the penguins had been very well preserved. Melting ice had recently exposed the deceased colony. The research findings showed that there were 3 periods of penguin occupation at the site. The most recent colony fled during the 14th century amid the onset of the Little Ice Age, but many were unable to reach the ocean because snow and ice blocked them in. Although it appears that no penguin colonies have nested at the site in quite some time, that may change in the future, according to penguin ecologist David Ainley, who told the New York Times that as global temperatures rise, small flocks of Adelaides are increasingly seen wandering the area and occasionally nesting there. Rising temperatures and melting ice is more than likely going to reveal more clues of Antarctica's past in the future. Fossilized egg. In 2011, Chilean scientists discovered a fossil egg resembling a deflated football on Seymour Island, off the Antarctic coast. Then it sat unidentified for nearly a decade in the collections of Chile's National Museum of Natural History. Dating back an estimated 68 million years, it likely belonged to a gigantic extinct marine reptile, perhaps a mosasaur, that lived during the time of the dinosaurs. The discovery, which was finally described in a study published last year, challenges the previously held notion that these types of creatures did not lay eggs. Measuring over 11 by 7 inches, it's the second largest egg on record, and it's also the first fossil egg found in Antarctica. It is from an animal the size of a large dinosaur, but it is completely unlike a dinosaur egg, said lead study author Lucas Legendre. It is most similar to the eggs of lizards and snakes, but it is from a truly giant relative of these animals. Legendre estimated that the creature who laid the egg measured over 20 feet from its snout to the end of its body, tail not included. The fossil was found near baby mosasaur and plesiosaur skeletons, bolstering the theory that the egg belonged to an ancient marine reptile. Scientists are unsure whether the animal who laid the egg did so in the water or on land, although on land would have been difficult, given the tendency for giant marine reptiles to be too heavy to support themselves out of water. But it's still possible, and the researchers are perplexed by the first of its kind discovery. Underwater methane leak. Last year, researchers revealed the 2011 discovery of the first known underwater methane leak in southern Antarctica, beneath the Ross Ice Shelf. Methane is a greenhouse gas that is up to 25 times more capable than carbon dioxide of exacerbating climate change. In other places throughout the world, methane-eating microbes eat the gas spewing from leaks, preventing it from entering the atmosphere. But in the case of the Antarctic methane leak, these microbes took 5 years to react to the leak and did not entirely consume the gas, according to a recently published study on the matter. This delayed methane consumption is not good news, marine ecologist Andrew Thurber told The Guardian. He further explained that because methane leaks in general are difficult to find, their impacts on climate change are not well studied, especially in Antarctica. Thurber and his colleagues visited the site repeatedly following its discovery and noticed after 5 years that the leak was still spewing, although methane-eating microbes had appeared. Since most climate models factor in these microbes as a way to keep methane leaks in check, Thurber referred to the finding as incredibly concerning. For years, the leak has been flowing into the Ross Sea and the atmosphere in general. On its own, this is not significantly damaging to the climate, but researchers suspect that there may be more methane leaks in the water surrounding Antarctica. If they behave similarly to the one that scientists know about, it could upend their understanding of the impacts that methane leaks have on the environment and warrant a complete restructuring of climate models. Human-sized penguin. Between 37 and 40 million years ago, penguins taller than the average modern human roamed Antarctica, according to a 2014 study by a team of researchers from the La Plata Museum in Argentina. Dubbed the Colossus penguin, the fossil used for the research is the most complete fossil ever found in Antarctica. From toe to beak tip, these gargantuan birds stood roughly 6.5 feet tall and weighed nearly 255 pounds. But some experts cautioned that because prehistoric penguins were proportioned much differently than modern species, these measurements may not be precise. Either way, the Colossus penguin was much bigger than the largest currently existing species, the emperor penguin, which stands at roughly 3.6 feet tall and weighs just under 110 pounds. The Colossus penguin dove underwater in search of food for up to 40 minutes at a time, a surefire advantage over smaller species who could not spend nearly as much time underwater. Found in La Meseta Formation on Seymour Island, the fossil comes from a place where, during prehistoric times, the climate was warmer and anywhere between 10 to 14 penguin species shared the Antarctic coastline. More human-sized penguin fossils were discovered in 2017 in southern New Zealand, one of the closest countries to Antarctica. The newly discovered species, the Kumimanu penguin, was slightly smaller than the Colossus penguin, measuring around 5.8 feet tall and weighing around 220 pounds. It lived around 55 million years ago during the Paleocene epoch, making it even older than the Colossus penguin. Both massive penguins likely lived during a time when both Antarctica and New Zealand were warmer. They shared the environment with other seabirds as well as sharks and turtles. The Kumimanu penguin went extinct around 20 million years ago after large marine creatures, including toothed animals like seals and whales, entered the ecosystem. Thanks for watching! If you'd like to learn about more fascinating Antarctic discoveries, let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you soon. Bye!